Good afternoon, everybody. My session today, I'm going to talk about Magecart, Magecart. Lots of people say different things. There's no official way to say it, so just stick with what you're comfortable with. And just really sort of look into what they're doing, how they're doing it, and the different groups that are out there and how they're developing over time in terms of the activity that they're doing. So I'll start by looking at two of the most high-profile breaches, Ticketmaster and British Airways. They're good examples because they're both different mechanisms for how they delivered the skimmers onto the different sites. So quickly cover those. Then I'll take a look at the different groups, how they're evolving and what they're doing, and a brief update on some of the more recent activity that we've seen. I'll sort of deviate out into browser-based injections as a sort of topic on its own. I think Magecart and card skimming is in many ways just sort of the tip of the iceberg. It's perhaps the easy to monetize activity, but there's lots of stuff that you can do with browser injections. So I'll take a quick look at that. Then talk about the different ways to detect or prevent it. And if we have time, I'll be honest, I don't think I will have time with all the other stuff I'm trying to cover. But if we have time, I'll try and run through RiskIQ's passive total solution to show how we do some of the investigations that lead us to finding the infrastructure that sits behind the different groups that are carrying out these attacks. So in June of last year, Ticketmaster hit the headlines. They'd lost, careless I suppose, 40,000 customers' credit card details. And this caught the eye of the security research team at RiskIQ because it was the language that they used. They talked about not a breach of their systems, not about, databases and passwords being salted and hashed and so on, but specifically they talked about malicious code embedded in a third-party technology on their website that led to this breach. It was on the website for, 4 months? In international customers, and I haven't seen any real discussion about the overall impact to their international customers, but they talked about it being on those sites for 9 months. So, these injections are out there, they sit on websites, nobody notices, they just quietly skim credit card information as they go. I'll take a sort of sidestep here to talk about how RiskIQ operates, because I think it will help as I go into the analysis to understand a little bit of what we do. This is a very busy slide, I apologize for that. I'm only going to talk about the first half of it. But RiskIQ spends its days crawling the internet. We've got hundreds of different proxy points around the world that our crawlers exit from to visit the sites on the internet. Our goal is to crawl the whole of the internet. I have to be honest and say that's quite a heady goal and one that we haven't really reached yet. But by feeding information into the system, that's domain registrations, passive DNS records, blacklist feeds, and a whole bunch of other things. Our crawlers set off at the beginning of every day to go out and visit the web. And as they go, they collect every bit and byte that they encounter. So the full document object model of every site, certificates, cookies, trackers, all of the JavaScript that's important for what we're going to talk about here today. They gather that information and they follow links. We refer to them as virtual users. It's headless browsing, so we do present ourselves as a sort of a human user, if you will. We don't do a wget on the site and then leave. We'll visit it many times over the course of a day, clicking on different links so that our behavior does not stand out as automated. And we do that because the stuff we're really looking for, the malicious stuff, sometimes has rules in it to detect automated analysis. So by behaving as human users, we're able to collect more information than otherwise possible. We do about 2 billion page requests a day, to give you an idea of the scale of what we're doing. And then that information comes into those cogs. For the technical among you, you'll notice that the arrows on the cogs mean that the cogs don't actually turn. My apologies for that. Someone pointed it out to me in a presentation a couple of weeks ago. But 3 functions that we do as the data comes in from that crawling network. First thing is we carry out the data science piece. And by that, I mean we look at the connectedness of all of the data that we collect. If we find a website, what other websites does it connect to? You know, what refers to it and where does it refer to? If there's a certificate on that site, where else are we seeing that certificate? Same with cookies, same with trackers. And we build out this sort of view of the web in terms of the connectedness of everything that you see. If any of you have used Passive Total, that's how we are delivering that data within Passive Total, so that you can carry out those investigations around infrastructure. The second part is that machine learning piece. So we will look, as we find things and see different malicious behaviors, then we can start to alert that so that we can tell our customers if we found something that's relevant to them. And then the final cog is the security research piece, and that's the team that did the research for the Magecart piece today. And they are constantly looking for new threats, new problems, so that they can not only build them into our platform, but also so that we can talk about them at events like this. So coming back to Ticketmaster, so I said we're doing over 2 billion page requests a day. The breach was there for about 90 days. So we had somewhere in the region of 200 billion crawls of data to go through. I should say Ticketmaster, not a customer of RiskIQ, so it's not like we were actively monitoring their code. So it was a bit of a challenge knowing where to start, but the good news was Ticketmaster had given us enough information within their press release. First of all, the Ticketmaster UK was compromised, so we could focus on their UK assets. They talked about Inventor, the fact that the script was actually hosted on Inventor hardware. And then the task was really to go through looking at all of the scripts that we found that were Ticketmaster UK hosted on Inventor. Let's see what we can find. And we used Passive Total. You can see just a quick snip there showing the subdomains of Ticketmaster on the Inventor site. We went and had a look at the crawl data for TicketmasterUK.Inventor. And this script here, or this box I've called out, inventor.js, Ticketmaster UK, inventor.com, that's the one that caught our eye. That was the one that seemed to be most interesting. This is what the script looks like, or at least the top of it. I've put the Magecart code in the red box, but I think it's also interesting to see the code that's underneath it, because that's not obfuscated. And that's always a sort of a red flag to us, at least, when we see a mix of obfuscated and unobfuscated code in one place. If we unobfuscate that code, then what we found was 67 lines. It is a simple Magecart skimmer. To be fair, nothing particularly outstanding about it from our perspective. I haven't put all 60 lines there because the text would have got so small. Even I wouldn't be able to read it standing here. But the box I've outlined, the web FOTCE, that's the exfil site. So you go onto Ticketmaster, you enter all of your credit card details. There's a box somewhere on there probably saying, if you have any problems, click here. That's the Inventor code. It was a help function within the site. You don't have to use the help function to activate it. Just the simple fact that it was on the payment page means that that script was loaded. But as you enter all of your details, and when you hit order, checkout, or one step, this wasn't a custom script for Ticketmaster. This was just designed to capture as much credit card information as possible. So there are key words that they're looking for in the script. As soon as that word is executed, the button is clicked, then the code is sent to WebFOTCE so that the information can then be utilized by the group that was doing this. This was a major news story. Ticketmaster, a well-known brand, not just in the UK, but around the world. had the potential for 10 million customers. That's the traffic that goes through the Ticketmaster site. But I guess not everybody that goes to the site actually purchases a ticket at the end of the visit. They got credit card number, username, expiry date, and most importantly for me, the CVV number. That's, to me, what gives a credit card its real value if you're going to try and sell it on in one of those dark web forums the previous speaker was talking about. I think what is most interesting for me is the fact that this all happens in the user's browser. None of this was happening in the Ticketmaster environment. To a degree, they have no visibility of this whatsoever. Your web application firewall's not going to pick this up, your firewall, your AV. It's all happening on the client's browser. How do you detect that activity? And then, this maybe is a conversation for another event. Arguably, Ticketmaster were not breached. It was a third party. That script had nothing to do with Ticketmaster other than the fact that they were using it. Now, the debate goes they should have done a better audit on their third parties, of course. But technically, their security was sound. It was a third party that got caught out. Switching to BA. So a couple months later, we're in September now. Another news article on the BBC again. This time 380,000 credit card details stolen in a much shorter time frame, only 3 weeks in this case. And again, it caught the eye of our research team because they didn't talk about database breaches and how they'd been sort of hacked. It was a compromise on their website. So again, and I should say again, BA, we're not a customer of RiskIQ, so it's not like we were looking to monitor their systems. This is just through our crawling data. Let's have a look, see if we've crawled BA, and we'll see what we find. And we found this script, Modernizer 2.6.2 min.js. The top snip shows how that file looked before the breach date that was announced. And pretty static script, actually. It hadn't changed since 18th of December 2012. And then, surprise, surprise, an hour before the date that BA announced that the hack had ended, we've got a new script being uploaded to the BA site. We thought, well, we'll take a look at that. We've deobfuscated this one and beautified it a little bit more than the last one. 22 lines of code. That was all it took to steal those 300,000 credit card details. It's quite nice. It's much tidier than the Ticketmaster one. They even wrote it. So this is specific to BA. This isn't a generic script. That's why I wanted to talk about the two examples. But they actually wrote this for both web browsers and mobile devices. The BA mobile app shares a lot of its infrastructure with the website. So they've put in an additional sort of touch component to the script so that they can make sure they get as many credit cards as possible, not just those on the web. We've seen versions of this that are 15 lines of code. This was slightly more complicated because BA actually keep the details of the individual paying in a slightly different place on the website to the rest of the credit card data. But still quite nice the way they've done it. And they exfilled to baways.com. And this is just sort of worth its own mention. This is nothing to do with British Airways, but it's a great copycat domain. If you're looking at this code, either within the BA organization, sort of scanning it, looking for any anomalies, maybe if you are doing some sort of monitoring on your browser to prevent something like this catching you, I'm just not sure that you would pick out the BA ways. It's just a really nice infringing domain. Registered a week before, or the cert was, sorry, this snip is from the week, a week previous. So they obviously had this access for, this wasn't a smash and grab. This is a nicely planned operation. Interesting that they registered a legitimate certificate as well. Why not use Let's Encrypt or a free certificate? These guys were really paying attention to what they were doing. It's just, I like it. And that's Magecart. That's what they do. Find a way onto a server. I can't tell you how Inventor were hacked. I can't tell you what happened with BA. All we can do is say, look, scripts were inserted into their infrastructure, and people just unwittingly are losing their credit card data. What we do know about Magecart, they've been around since about 2014. We've been tracking them actively since about 2015. They started by playing on the server side with the Magento payment system. That's where Magecart comes from. You'll see the snip at the bottom says mage.js. The Mage, and then tie that in with cart because it's a shopping cart, and that's where you've got the name from. It's morphed as we've seen more groups joining the operation into more of an umbrella term for this type of activity for people doing credit card skimming on the web. And we have seen different activity. We've seen these sort of cards appearing on dark web forums, in dump sites. We've also been able to track some reshipping fraud behavior as well. But we haven't done a huge amount of attribution on the actual individuals themselves. We've left that to the people who are experts at that. Our job is to try and collect this data rather than to analyze who's actually doing it. But drilling into the groups, so as I say, Group 1 started by targeting, actually they started targeting vulnerable Magento servers. So they were looking for just simple weaknesses in the system and then starting to target them. We initially logged it as a keylogger. They were just tracking when numbers were being entered into the forms on a website. At the point where you finished entering the expiry date of your card, that's typically the last field on a credit card you fill in, then the data would be exfilled out to another location, in this case jssave.link. They didn't have as much success on the server side. It's pretty difficult to break server-side components, and that's why we saw them move to the client side. It was much more robust in terms of the insertion of the code, and without causing any additional problems. The sharp ones among you will notice that I've jumped from Group 1 to Group 3. Group 2, we initially categorized the monetization activity of Group 1 as a second group, and then we brought them together when we realized it was actually the same operators doing the same work. So moving on to Group 3, these guys, they sort of industrialized the process. They built out forms for a large number of the different payment processing systems that are available. If you look at this code, you'll see it's got eWay, Adyen, Radweb. These are all very common processing systems. And just to make it easier, the keylogger meant that you'd have to do some parsing on the data to find the credit card information within the data that you've just pilfered. By creating those forms, they just make it much easier to bring the data out. Group 4 entered the market. This is probably late 2017 we saw these guys, maybe early 2018. They came from the banking Trojan environment. So, these guys have been doing this for a long time, and they obviously realized that there was low-hanging fruit here, and built out their capabilities. The snip of code there shows that them doing counter-analysis activity in their JavaScript. Their original JavaScript was about 1,500 lines of code. So, when I talk about Ticketmaster, that was 67 lines of code. This is much beefier, not nearly as efficient, but interesting in how they were doing timing analysis to see if it was a machine looking at their code rather than just a human victim. If they did detect machine analysis, then they provide benign JavaScript rather than the nasty stuff. Group 5, these are the guys that caught Ticketmaster out. As I say, they went for a third party, and the results were exceptional. If you tally up the number of sites that we've found which have been compromised by Group 5. There's over 20,000 sites there. Some of them will be low volume, some of them are high volume, but they've just found a simple script that they can insert into any presumably vulnerable JavaScript that's out there. It's in plugins, so they've only had to compromise, whatever it is, 10 systems, and they've had fantastic results from it. 20,000 other sites now running Magecart systems. The skimmer itself is nothing unusual. It's just the attack vector went to mass scale rather than sort of focused attacks. Group 6 is very focused attacks. We haven't seen a huge number of sites compromised by these guys, but when they do, it's usually big. I've already talked about this, I don't want to go into too much detail, but just to come back to that baways.com, I love the way that their URL also follows the syntax coming from the legitimate BA site. Similar with Newegg. Newegg is a US online shopping site. Neweggsstats.com. They've followed the capitalization from the legitimate site. It's just such a great attention to detail. I can't help but admire it. Group 7, these guys caught our attention simply because they're not doing the standard exfil. They're using compromised domains, legitimate domains, find a subdomain that they can exfil the data to, and then transfer the data from there. Makes it much harder for takedowns to take place. We've been working with abuse.ch and Shadow Server on a very regular basis as we identify new infrastructure being stood up around any of the Magecart actors. We're working with them to carry out takedowns. These guys, it's much harder to do because if the domain is legitimate, then you have to kind of follow contact an organization. Is this your domain? Who administers it? Did you know you're being used as a mule? And blah, blah, blah. It takes a lot longer. It's much harder to do. That, up to Group 7, took us up to round about the end of last year. Since then, we've seen another 6 or 7 groups popping up. And we're now starting to get a little bit sort of more detailed in terms of when we attribute them. It's just becoming too much work following the attribution. 8 and 10 in this group are essentially, there is nothing new in what they're doing other than the fact it's new infrastructure. So again, we'll work to take down their infrastructure, but we're not particularly tracking the people who are just doing copycat of everything else. Group 9 is possibly one of my favorites. Credit to Willem de Groot, who actually posted about this. But this one, so Group 3 were compromised a site. They were happily skimming the data, all was good, this is nice. And then Group 9 compromised it. And, you'd think that they might coexist peacefully, but they didn't. Group 9 changed their code so that whenever they detected the Mage 3 activity, the Group 3 activity, they'd generate a random number, replace one of the numbers in the credit card with that random number, and then send that to Group 3. There is no honor among thieves. As the last speaker was saying, reputation is everything on the dark web. And if you can trash the data that they're trying to sell, you're really working to take out your opposition. It's just, lovely example that was found there. Group 11, this was Vision Direct. Vision Direct, when they announced that they'd been compromised, said it was only the UK and 1 or 2 other sites. We saw it on significantly more infrastructure. I think all of those listed there, one of 18, is it, were all compromised at the same time. They introduced more keywords. So I talked about one-step checkout, and I can't remember what the other one was, buy now or something. These guys added admin, account, login, and password. And this has been something that's been in the back of my mind ever since we started talking about these injections is, credit cards are just the tip of the iceberg, aren't they? What else could you collect? Any any site that collects information and runs JavaScript, I suppose, is a target. And these guys have just broadened that reach. So to say, yeah, we can collect anything. We don't know what we'll get. Who knows? But a lot of the injections that we're seeing, we believe at least, they're automated, and they're just spray and pray their code into whatever JavaScript they can. Why not see if you strike lucky with some of the account login information? You never know what might come back. So I thought that was an interesting development, and I wonder if we will see anybody else sort of going further with that. Group 12, these guys are interesting. I mean, they're using script tags, which we haven't seen in many of the other groups. It's much more plug and play. They compromised Adverline, ad company, and that got them, again, just great coverage. You can cover a huge amount of ground if you're, if people are actively putting your compromised code onto many sites. So nice coverage that they achieved there. And they broadened it out into French and German. Now, to date, we've been seeing mainly English, some Latin American, Spanish, but these guys broadened it to French and German as well. So again, we're seeing a little bit more internationalization in terms of the targets that we're seeing. Why shouldn't the French and the Germans get skimmed as well? And that's just breaking out the script tag. So group 4 I talked about. These were the guys that came from the banking, the Trojan environment. They've completely rewritten their code. It's now 150 lines. Previously, it was more of a sort of phishing overlay. Now they're doing what we consider to be more sort of mainline skimming. They've really started to change their behavior. They're now only putting 5 domains per IP. They're going to more hosting providers than we've seen previously. We think that's a direct result of the takedowns that we're doing. The good news is that you're only using the infrastructure piece in the last step of the puzzle just to broaden out what they're doing. The initial detection has nothing to do with infrastructure. So they can keep on running and hiding and shuffling, but fortunately it manages to get detected anyway. I was quite impressed that they started to include encryption in their new piece of code as well. At least they're mindful of PCI DSS regulations, so that's good. And this one's kind of hot off the press. We saw a sudden and dramatic spike in injections that we were detecting about 2 weeks ago. I've put tens of thousands and then possibly hundreds of thousands. At this point in the investigation, I couldn't tell if it was just the researcher getting excited or if it was genuinely hundreds of thousands of sites that were being impacted. And we couldn't work out where that spike was coming from. The guys were sort of starting to sort of pull the threads and see what the common factor was. And it seemed that the JavaScript that was compromised in all of these different cases was being hosted on S3 buckets. I don't just mean one JavaScript, but all of the different JavaScripts that were being used were being hosted on different S3 buckets. And so they started looking a bit further, and then they kind of realized that these S3 buckets are all world writable. Is that even possible? I couldn't believe it. I was watching, Paul, your presentation earlier, and I was waiting for you to bring up a slide that showed, don't let your buckets be world writable. And I tried to find a screenshot that showed where they would, somehow default to be world writable. People are hosting JavaScript that other people are using in S3 buckets, which are completely editable. You download it, insert your skimmer, upload it back up, and hey, happy days, right? We're going to go public with this, not with the names of the people infected, but just to say, look, for God's sake, don't put world writable files on the internet unless you really, really, really mean to. 2 of the victims we've identified are prepaid credit card providers. This is it's great stuff, right? Other updates, just sort of things that we've found. I tried to keep a list of the things that are going on. Group 7, these guys came from the malware environment, and they initially they started just doing skimmers, but they had a little look at doing malware drops. So again, another sort of possible vector when you finally got a compromised site. What else can you do other than just skim credit cards? We haven't really seen that evolve into anything other than their tests. We just saw changes in their code that showed what they were experimenting with. Maybe they're now doing their experiments offline. We're not sure. We saw text support scammers trying to join in. That was based off the infrastructure. We saw the same infrastructure that's being used for tech support scams being used for skimming. They weren't successful. I guess that's why the tech support scammers are not tech support, is you've got to know what you're doing in order to do this. There's about 20 off-the-shelf skimmers now. If you look in some of the different sort of dark web forums, different prices, different availability, different support available. And we're seeing, obviously the last couple of weeks aside, because it's been dramatically different, but about 40 to 50 Magecart compromises a day. I think that's the absolute tip of the iceberg. We are not targeting our crawlers on payment pages. We are not out there looking for Magecart. It's just that we keep finding it. And it's our estimate that if we were to target the crawlers to look for it specifically, go for every payment page you can, we reckon this would be up to sort of the 500 to 1,000 mark. We're just finding enough to keep us busy. We don't need any more. But it's just interesting to see that. So vulnerabilities is the main one, I think, in terms of how they're getting in. Certainly the automated scripts that we're seeing, just either old or vulnerable code is being used to carry out these injections. Third-party scripts just broadens the reach that you get as you compromise different scripts. And then we are seeing focus compromise. As I say, BA was, certainly a targeted, very, very specific and targeted compromise. Different levels of sophistication, as I've said, and then different exfil processes, although to be fair, we're only really seeing one group using the proxy process to deliver the code. Sort of broadening out, as I said at the beginning, I think card skimming is only really one application of Java-based injection. There are all sorts of other things you can do. Form jacking, just gathering the data, that's similar to card skimming, but also cryptocurrency miners. We're not seeing a huge amount of Bitcoin mining at the moment. 9 months ago, we were seeing a lot more. I don't think that's because it's not difficult. I don't think it's because people can't do it. I think it's just that Bitcoin price has crashed and it's just easier to monetize through other means at the moment. I think if Bitcoin goes back in price, then we will probably see more Bitcoin miners being inserted into different sites. Waterholing, the snip on the right is an example of a waterholing attack. This is an RFC edge case. Browsers don't worry so much about images as they do about executable files. If you can insert a file, an image file, into a web page, then it bypasses some of the inspections. In this case, that snip was on a Ukrainian IT website. And if you went to it, maybe a Ukrainian IT administrator was having a tea break, is going to catch up on the news. You're in the middle of reading a very interesting article on whatever it is, and an SMB window pops up saying one of your connections is timed out. You just want to quickly add your admin username and password, and then get back to your cup of tea and your news article. And of course, this is just phishing, that information. So, just a good example of a waterholing attack. And then just fingerprinters. We see a lot of people just simply collecting information for whatever means they may be using that data for, whether it's traffic redirectors, driving traffic to different places. It's hard to work out. I do see this as the new front line. I think lots of people have invested huge time and resources in securing their data in their data centers, and for good reason. That's probably the best place to start. But it means that criminal groups are now looking at other ways to steal information, and I think this is a great place to do it. I was talking to a friend the other day who was saying their mortgage application this year was completely online. 2 years ago, I got a piece of paper that I had to sign and send back. But all of that data is going through client browsers, which are not policed and monitored in the same way as all of those traditional systems that you would find in major organizations. So this data is out there and it's available to be taken. I'm running out of time, so I need to speed up a little bit. I don't know how I'm doing. 5 minutes, thank you. So we were just looking at different injection types. The script tag that I showed you from Magecart Group 12, it's just nice and easy. It's plug and play. Makes it much easier to automate the process of adding script tags. The supply chain, so the Ticketmaster breach inventor, that was just nicely done. The third parties aren't necessarily a security organization that you're targeting, so it's just a nice way of breaking in. Putting the scripts at the top or the bottom, it's easier to detect, but it's also least likely to break anything. I've seen a few examples in the last month of scripts that have been injected and broke the script that they were trying to inject in. So it can go wrong if you try to get too cute. We do see them trying to put the injection into the executable scope rather than, making a mistake and it only runs on certain occasions. Inventor would be a good example of that. That was customer help tool, and if it hadn't been in the executable scope, they'd only been able to collect the credit card details when someone was asking for help, and they'd probably get all of their conversation as well as the credit card data. Function inlining is just quite a nice way of doing it. It's quite tidy. You just suddenly add a new function to an existing one, and again, much harder to spot. And the RFC edge case was the example I gave you at the beginning, the watering hole attack. I'm super envious of the people that can read those RFC reports in detail, understand them, and then find the vulnerabilities within them. But those people do exist, and my respect to them, even if they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. In terms of how can you protect yourself, I think I work for Risk IQ. We talk about managing your external attack surface, and that, for me, is the way to go here. You need to understand what assets you've got. If I were to ask a room now whether you could say you know how many websites your organization actually has, I very much doubt that any of you could give me an accurate number. And I think that's just, as again, the tip of the iceberg. How many of you know what JavaScript you're hosting on your site? How much of that JavaScript is hosted locally? How much of it is by third parties? How much of it is on world writable S3 buckets? So you need to understand your external attack surface. You need to manage that. You need to bring it under control, make sure everything is patched, and not leave things out there which shouldn't be out there. Talking about JavaScript specifically, iframe sandboxing. A lot of people criticize BA for not having iframes in operation on the payment page. I've seen a lot of talk about content security policy, sub-resource integrity checking, all super good things. They will definitely make it a lot harder to do this. I also think that's much easier said than done. The complexity of a lot of web infrastructure now doesn't mean that you can just flick this stuff on and go, yeah, we've done it, we're much securer. There are projects behind this and significant, forklift changes that need to be made to make these work. I also worry that for some of the breaches that we've seen where the code has been highly customized, whether some of these mechanisms can be bypassed as well. We saw one group arguing with a web administrator in a document object model. It was infected. The administrator removed it. The Magecart group said, we put it back, stop it. The next time they said, you're very naughty admins. Next time you do this, we will delete your site. If you have that much access to a system, then these policies are probably not going to protect you. And that brings me to my last point, which is continuous auditing. Again, BA was 3 months. Ticketmaster was 3 months in the UK, 9 months in total. We're seeing more and more of these. I think last week, Leicester City Football Club got popped. Anybody buy a Leicester City football shirt in May? If you did, check your credit card. Forbes got popped the week before then. We're seeing this all over the place, and these breaches are all there for weeks, if not months. You need to be monitoring for this on a regular basis. My shameless plug at the end, use Risk IQ. That's what we do. We're really good at it. So please do, I'll be around for the rest of the day. Please come and talk to me if you want to know more about the presentation, or obviously how Risk IQ can help. And my final piece, on your bags is a big Risk IQ logo. Under that is a promo code for Passive Total. If you would like to do some of the investigations, you can put in some of the domains that I've shared in the presentation today. You can do some of your own investigations with that promo code. It will give you extra searches on Passive Total. Thank you very much for your time today. I don't know whether I've got time for any questions. If there are any questions, I'm happy to try and take them. Sorry, I didn't warn you earlier, did I? To action with the microphones. Any questions? Yeah.
So when you say you do this continuous auditing, is that simply checking that the JavaScript has changed and alerting when that happens?
So for our customers, we crawl their sites on at least a daily basis, looking for changes that take place within that environment. Now, we can say if the JavaScript has changed, we'll tell you about it. One of the challenges we've found is that JavaScript changes a lot, and therefore you run the risk of getting a lot of noise. So what we've developed is specific detection looking at malicious activity, and we will alert you when we see malicious activity. So you'll get an audit report telling you what's changed on maybe a daily or a weekly basis, depending on your appetite, and then alerts when we see something like I've been talking about today occurring, so that you can take more immediate action.
Could you comment about the link between the BA breach and the Inventor stuff? Because the Inventor stuff includes loads of BA subsidiaries, doesn't it?
I'm sorry?
Could you comment on the link between the BA breach and the Inventor scripts? Because the Inventor scripts include BA subsidiaries in the list of affected parties. Or is that news?
You mean that BA were using Inventor on their website? So I do know that there were, I think when we looked at it, over 30 different scripts running on the BA payment pages when we analysed it. I haven't looked at it in light of Inventor and whether they were potentially compromised two ways. It'd be interesting to go back and take a look to see if I can spot that. They were completely separate breaches. If that was the case, then that's just a fascinating byline to the story. Inventor, came out in June and announced this. BA was after that. The attribution that we've given this is two very, very different groups. Magecart Group 6 are highly focused on specific compromise. They're not going for that broad brush approach. But no, I haven't seen that Inventor was specifically on the BA website. I haven't thought to correlate that back, but I'll go back and take a look because it would be an interesting thing to look for. Thank you. Right. Oh, one more question. Go on. If I've got time. We're done. Okay. I'll catch you later. Thank you very much, everybody.